I got a lot of my personal interest in this conference. United Airlines, which I'm a loyal flyer of, the Speaker of the House, who I cover, and now Charlie Baker, who runs the NCAA, and I'm a huge college basketball fan. So,
so am I, by the way.
I would imagine so, but you get better seats than I do. If you could put in a good word with the selection committee for GW to get in, we don't have to worry because they're going to win the A10 championship next week.
Which means they get an automatic qualifier.
They get an automatic bid. So 2 years.
Yes.
Been at the head. You've been running the NCAA. You were Massachusetts governor, which is, I think you're probably still a politician when you run the NCAA. You still have to please a lot of constituencies. You have a lot of constituent services you have to do. What's the biggest surprise as you've led, I'd say, and we were talking about this backstage, the NCAA and college sports through probably its biggest transformation in history?
Maybe not in history, but certainly in the last 40 years.
Yeah, okay, 40 years.
Biggest surprise?
Yeah.
Probably the best part is how much I enjoy spending time with student athletes, with young people generally. That's been a really pleasant surprise. They're great kids. I think the biggest surprise generally was the amount of litigation. I mean, I'm a healthcare and government guy. I've been around a lot of litigation in my career. But yeah, that piece in particular and the lack of sort of settled law on so many different issues, that was a surprise.
So what people have called this a borderline impossible gig.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's nice. Somebody should have told me that before I took it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you is what was your thought process when you took this job? What made you say yes?
Well, I was 60 days from leaving office. I actually had another job that I was going to do. And I got a call from a friend of mine who had talked to the search firm for the NCAA job. And he said, geez, I kind of thought of you. And I said, I don't know why, because I've never been in higher education and, I'm not a college sports person per se. I played, my wife played, my kids played, but...
Okay, so you're kind of a college sports person.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been around it.
Yeah.
But he said, well, can I send you the job description? So he sent it to me and I gave it to my wife because at that point in time, this would have been a left field move and I wanted her to at least say it was okay to interview for it. And she read it and she said, yeah, that does sound kind of like you. They have 180 committees. It's a distributed decision-making model, lots of bylaws and legislation. Sounds a lot like
being
government. Yes.
Right.
Look, I never felt I went to Harvard, I played basketball there. I never felt at home except when I was playing basketball at Harvard.
Same with my 7-year-old. But he didn't play at Harvard. But he feels at
Smart kid if he was playing at Harvard.
Yeah, he's 7, so he will play at Harvard.
Good for him. My kids, as I said, our boys both played football at the D3 level. Lauren, my wife, was a gymnast, best athlete in the family. We know so many people who wouldn't have graduated from high school, much less gone to or graduated from college if it wasn't for college sports. I knew the place had challenges and issues, and that's a cause that I can get behind.
Yeah. Now, one of the biggest news right now coming down the pike for the NCAA is the $2.8 billion House versus NCAA settlement. Yep. Moving toward final approval, theoretically, in 2025. Talk about this case, what it will mean for college sports, and how confident you are that this will bring some stability, and what's the next step after it's finalized?
Okay, so for those, think of it this way. There's two pieces. There's the history, the back damage piece, and then there's the go-forward piece. And the House settlement actually involves 3 or 4 different lawsuits that got mashed together by the plaintiffs and by us and by the 5 power conferences to try to settle them. And the $2.8 billion in back damages.
And let's put table stakes here. This is about schools directly paying. Why don't you, in your words, say what it's about exactly?
Okay, so the back damage part is going to be paid for by the NCAA, national office, and by the schools. The go-forward part is going to be paid for mostly by the schools, but there's some enabling stuff in there around third-party name, image, and likeness stuff as well. So we're going to pay $280 million a year for the next 10 years to about 400,000 student athletes who signed up to participate in the plaintiff's class, and they will get those benefits over the next 10 years. And of the 400,000 that signed up as part of the class, almost all of them signed up once the deal was done. So that's a good sign. Kids seem to be pretty happy with that result. The go-forward piece is a calculation that translates into giving D1 schools the ability to put up to $20 million a year per school into what we're calling institutional name, image, and likeness. So schools can revenue share with their student athletes, 20 million, up to 20 million a year. And there's another piece of this, which is a third-party NIL process. And in both cases, one of the main objectives here was to try to create some transparency around process, outcome, and accountability. Because there are a lot of kids under the current system, frankly, who get lied to, misrepresented, false promises made. They go into a transfer portal, they expect something, it's not there at the other end. Very troubling for all of us. The best part about this is it's going to be structured and it's not going to be opaque. It's going to be very transparent, and it's going to be $1 billion a year, plus or minus, in institutional name, image, and likeness to student athletes. That's a big number.
And it's probably better from right now, it is these NIL collectives, which are ostensibly separate from the schools.
And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's just boosters.
Right, who just pay the players.
Yeah.
This centralizes it in your view, and I think in reality it centralizes it in saying school X could pay, player Y, effectively an amount of money, and it centralizes it and makes it a little bit cleaner in your view.
Oh my God, it'll be so much more transparent, and the schools care a lot more about their reputation and their relationship with student athletes than these third parties. I do think it will create a much more consumer-centric approach than the one we have now. I also think more kids will get to participate, which is also important.
Okay, and how do you see this changing the dynamic between athletes, universities, and the NCAA, especially for some of these smaller programs? And talk about the competitiveness piece. I mean, a school that can't afford several $1 million, in paying their players or whatever that might be, how do you see the competitiveness?
So one of the things the NCAA, a lot of the antitrust issues that the NCAA has been dealing with for the past 10 years or so are because we tried to create a one-size-fits-all for everybody and then jam everyone into it. Right. Schools, coaches, players, everybody. And that is exactly what the courts basically said, stop doing that. The best part about this settlement, in my opinion, is schools will make choices about which sports they want to be nationally competitive in and in which ones they either don't want to or can't be competitive in. And, to be truly competitive in basketball, men's or women's, you don't need a ton of money to be truly competitive. And I fully expect we're going to see more competition in many sports because a lot of the money that historically schools generated through football that supported other sports, it's now going to stay in football, which is going to make it possible for other schools to compete a lot more effectively with some of the ones that were using their football money to drive performance in other sports.
This opens an issue that you guys will have to deal with about employment status for these student athletes. Can you avoid that fight, or how do you see that playing out?
Well, the injunction that's being put in place basically works, the injunction that is hopefully going to be put in place will put in place for some period of time a program where this institutional NIL, which to some extent has never been done before, as you say, it's the biggest move in a very long time, that will become kind of the test case for how this works. And I think the employment issue is a real one. I think we should deal with it. We can't solve that. One of the things I heard from Congress when I got this job was clean up your own house, then come talk to us. We created a post-eligibility health insurance program for student athletes. We created core guarantees for kids in Division I around scholarships. We went real hard at the sports betting issue, which is a huge problem for young people. And we created a settlement that's going to put $1 billion a year into the pockets of student athletes through an NIL program. I mean, those are the things we can solve. The employment question, I can't solve. And that's one of the things I would like to see some help from the feds on. And the thing to remember about this employment issue, it has huge consequences for all colleges, including small colleges, including schools that really can't afford to double the size of their workforce, which is what this would require. And a lot of student athletes, believe it or not, don't want to be employees. We have lots of student athlete advisory councils at the conference level, at the school level, and at the NCAA level who are on the record saying, I don't want to, employment's not my answer. My answer is some sort of rev share and a commitment to me and my education, because I know I'm not going to play professionally. I still got to get my degree, and I got to launch in something other than sports.
Do you, so is there going to be more transparency in the contract process? Is there going to be,
Yeah.
like, are you going to, I mean, I think part of the challenge is now a kid goes into, and let's just use college basketball because we're in March.
And that's your favorite sport.
And it's my favorite sport.
Yeah.
A kid says, I'm going in the transfer portal, school X offered me $2 million or $1 million a year, and I mean, how do you regulate that? How do you put some sort of guardrails around that?
Well, one of the things that comes with the institutional program, I believe, is a lot more ownership on the part of schools generally, and I do believe that the power schools are creating what I would describe as a framework for managing this stuff that will be a lot more focused on these issues than we've historically been. Because remember, the NCAA regulates a million different things.
Yep.
And by having the power conferences basically really focused on just the issues associated with institutional NIL and third-party NIL, I think that's going to give us a chance to create a very focused approach to enforcement and sort of what I call consumer protections and some of those other issues.
Yeah, and you mentioned sports betting, which is, in I think 38 states now, or 39 states.
39.
39 states. Anyone could go on, FanDuel or whatever.
By the way, it doesn't matter whether you're in a state where it's legal or not. I mean, we did a survey on this right after I got the job because I heard kids talk to me about it before I took the job back in '23. And there was no difference in the amount of participation in sports betting between 18 and 22-year-olds if they were in a state where it was legal or a state where it wasn't. And the kids under 21, which they're not supposed to be betting, they bet at exactly the same rate as the kids over the age of 21. So this is basically a 50-state play, and anybody over the age of 18 is playing the game.
Yeah. So there's two sides to this coin. There's how do you stop students from betting on their games?
Yeah.
You could just do it from an app, and you could bet it. There's a million things you could bet on. You could bet on almost any facet of any game.
Well, the survey we did showed that kids on campus, it was like 50 to 60% of kids on campus were betting on sports.
But and student athletes ostensibly could bet, which would not be a great thing. And then there's the second piece, which is outsiders who are betting on basketball games or football games, and the interaction between the fan, tennis, or
you name it.
I'm sure you could bet on anything, table tennis if you want. But I'm sure. But then there's those people who are outsiders who are betting, and they lose money, they get angry at a student. I mean, so there's a lot of facets to this. And how do you control that?
We had so much incoming news from young people about what they were seeing online and what they were hearing behind the bench, that we actually hired a company to track social media traffic that was being directed at coaches, referees, and student athletes in most of our major championships. And we published a report on it. And we didn't even put the ugliest of the stuff that we couldn't. I mean, some of the stuff was so ugly we couldn't put it into the public domain. But you literally had thousands of this, and this was not even direct messages. This is just their public handle, okay? You had some kids where there were literally thousands of threats, very specific, very particular, directed at them for, not taking the first shot, missing their free throw, not hitting their prop. We're trying very hard to get rid of prop betting on college sports. We've managed to move that out of a number of states. Still, half of the states permit prop betting on college sports. This is probably the worst part of all, because that's where a young person ends up with classmates and other people coming up to him and saying, look, I don't want you to throw a game, but I just need you.
Make fewer than 10 free throws.
Make fewer than, or don't take the first shot, or don't catch the first pass, or whatever it is. And you put young people in a really terrible spot with this stuff. And even just the common conversation that used to take place in the dining hall, that's like currency now. And I think the more we've provided an educational on-campus tool now to over 100,000 student athletes, and we're going to keep making it available to them. It's very popular, and it's about two things. Number one, the dangers and the challenges associated with the way people draw you into betting, and then the second is how to deal with the folks who are coming at you looking for your help with respect to their habit. So,
and how about student athletes betting? I mean, how do you control that?
We survey them all the time, and we have the largest integrity program in the world, tracking sports betting with several third parties on the sports books. And we are very aggressive about this stuff, and it's pretty, unless somebody's really off the books, it's pretty hard for us not to know what's going on.
Okay, so you mentioned the feds. The Congress said, get your house in order, which is ironic for Congress to say to anybody else, considering their house is oftentimes not in order, and then come to us. So if you could wave a wand, what are some of the things that Congress could do to help the NCAA?
Well, obviously, the employment issue is huge, very high on our list. And if you talk to any mid-sized school, they'll tell you it's probably talk to Olympic sports, it's probably the single biggest threat to their future success. The second thing is, there are 40 different state laws around NIL. It's pretty hard to create a level playing field around NIL when you have states writing laws to make sure the schools in their states can outperform the other schools in their conferences, much less nationally. So that one is really a big problem and an enormous challenge. And I think the third one would just be some capacity to write rules without ending up in court all the time. And I've said before, I'm not looking for blanket liability protection here. I would just like some limited liability that if we're writing rules around things like how many years you can play, which has now become, after 100 years of it basically being 4 years, this has suddenly become a big issue. Those would be kind of the big three.
So mental health has been a big focus for you.
Yeah.
And there are, forget just the pressures that college kids face on a day-to-day basis just from studies and from being away from home and all that stuff. Student athletes face a tremendous amount of pressure, no matter if they're playing basketball, softball, volleyball, whatever it may be. What steps is the NCAA taking to protect and to support students?
Well, we constantly update our guidance around mental health and well-being services. We also run almost weekly a spotlight series where the woman who's our chief medical officer brings together experts on certain areas associated with athletic training, mental health, health and well-being, pre and post practice and game supports, relationship between sports and academics. And she hosts sort of the equivalent of seminars and gets experts on. And we typically have somewhere between 500 and 1,000 folks from schools across all three divisions on these, and our stay rate is really high. It's roughly north of 85 to 90%. And there's a lot of incoming during the conversation from people asking questions. I'm a big believer that in many cases, a lot of the answers to a lot of these kinds of issues are with the practitioners who already exist in our colleges and universities. The goal, from my point of view, and I think from Dina's as well, who runs this program, is to give them all a chance to talk to each other and to bring student athletes into those conversations and to bring the student athlete advisory councils in and basically create what has become an ongoing conversation about what best practice looks like and what the right things to do to both not only provide services, but to track how your services are working.
Okay, two lighthearted questions to end this conversation. Number one, so this is a very busy month of the year for college basketball, particularly. You have countless number of sites. You have 3 divisions. You have men's and women's athletics. Give a sense of your schedule for March going into this very critical month for me, basically.
For you?
Yes.
Yes. I'll see what I can do about it. Yeah. By the way, once Selection Sunday happens, we are going to oversee and deliver 450 basketball games in 23 days.
It's crazy.
Between Division I, Division II, Division III, men's and women's. And it is beyond wildly hilarious and fun and exciting. And I probably won't spend more than 2 or 3 days at home. And I go to D3 games, I go to D2 games, I go to men's games, I go to women's games. I mean, my view on this stuff is, I'll be in San Antonio for the men's Final Four, I'll be in Tampa for the women's Final Four, but I am going to go to a ton of other games. Some of the most exciting college sports events I've been to in this job have been D2 and D3. We have, playing in the D2 tournament, the Elite Eight and the Final Four and the championship in Evansville, Indiana, Nova Southeastern, which is a Division II basketball program that's run by a guy who many people consider to be the best college coach.
I read a story about
and
it.
maybe the best coach in basketball in the country.
This is the guy who has a totally different view on how to play basketball effectively, right?
They call they basically call it madness. And I can't wait to see them play.
Yeah. I read about him, yep.
There's so much to love about college sports across all three divisions. Some of my most favorite moments are with student athletes and programs that will never get much attention outside the community in which they live in. And they teach the same lessons about the grind and being a teammate and getting back up when you get knocked down, and all the same lessons that everybody else teaches, and they're every bit as important, and that was a big part of why I took the job. Okay, so you, in a previous life, you were governor of Massachusetts. Do you ever have any itch to get back into to elected office? Look, you've not ruled it out, I think, right? Is that... No, look, nobody's ever been in politics, ever rules anything out, right? Right. But I think what I would say is that that was probably the hardest and most rewarding job I ever had, and I grew enormously fond of the people who work in the public sector because of it. You would meet people. Eastern equine encephalitis, okay? If you're a governor in a state that has a lot of ponds, you deal with this every spring. Right. And there are people who work in the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts who that's what they know. And so I learned, among other things, there are something like 75 different kinds of mosquitoes. Do you want me to keep going here? I can go pretty deep on this one. But the point is... I just want to know if you're going to run for Senate in Massachusetts effectively. No. Okay. But I love the time I spent doing that work. I really did. Hey, listen, if I could have a choice between going to a lot of college basketball games and being a senator, there's literally zero. I'd have no. Yeah. I wouldn't struggle with that decision in any way. Yeah, although those folks are pretty important to me these days. Yes, I'm sure they are. On some of our issues, yeah. I'm sure they are. Charlie Baker, president of the NCAA, thank you very much. Hey, thank you. Good to see you.